In the heart of Detroit, there's an asylum buried deep in the woods, a place erased from the city's memory. Abandoned for over 40 years, it's said to be cursed by the souls of those who were never allowed to leave. Tonight, 4 urban explorers stand at its entrance, unaware that they are not the first to step inside, but they will be the last to ever come out. Josh, Liz, Tom, and Emma were seasoned urban explorers who sought adrenaline through forgotten places. When they heard about an asylum in the woods outside Detroit, one that had been closed since the 1970s, they knew they had to check it out. Locals refused to speak much about the place, only calling it Hale's Hell. The rumor was that Dr. Hale, the asylum's lead psychiatrist, had gone mad, experimenting on his patients until they started disappearing one by one. The group set out late one foggy evening. The asylum loomed ahead, its gates rusted shut, vines crawling up its decrepit stone walls. A broken "No Trespassing" sign swung lazily in the breeze. Once inside, they were greeted by a damp, cold air that felt alive. The entrance hall was eerily pristine, everything was covered in dust, but nothing seemed disturbed. Faded medical charts still hung from the walls, and wheelchairs were scattered as if abandoned in haste. The group decided to split up, always a bad idea in hindsight. Josh and Emma took the stairs to the basement, while Liz and Tom ventured to the second floor. In the basement, the smell of rot grew stronger. They found old medical equipment, gurneys with broken straps, rusted scalpels, and syringes. The worst part was the bloodstains, still visible on the floor and walls. As Josh shone his flashlight around, it flickered, then died. Emma pulled out her phone to use as a light, and in its glow they both saw it, a figure standing at the far end of the hall watching them. It didn't move, didn't speak. They turned to run, but a door slammed shut, trapping them. Upstairs, Liz and Tom explored the patient rooms. Inside one, they found a diary belonging to a former nurse, detailing how Dr. Hale had started performing treatments late at night, and how patients began disappearing. The diary stopped abruptly, the last page smeared with blood. Tom's flashlight flickered as they heard the sound of heavy breathing coming from down the hall. When they turned to investigate, the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly. The door they had entered through was no longer visible. Suddenly, the hospital lights flickered to life, revealing blood-soaked walls. The breathing grew louder, echoing from all directions. A shadow crept toward them, dragging something metal behind it, a rusty surgical saw. As the shadow neared, it became clear, this was no living person. It was Dr. Hale himself, his face grotesquely twisted, the sound of whispers following him like a breeze. Liz screamed as Tom tried to pull her back, but they both froze when Hale's hollow eyes locked onto them. Meanwhile, in the basement, Josh and Emma tried to force open the door. Just as they managed to pry it loose, the figure they had seen earlier appeared right behind them. The figure's face was mutilated beyond recognition. It whispered, "You shouldn't have come here," before lunging at Emma. Josh screamed, but it was too late. Emma was dragged into the darkness, leaving nothing but a blood-curdling scream behind. Upstairs, Liz and Tom found themselves in the operating theater. Old metal tables were lined up, restraints still attached. Liz tried to speak, but her voice cracked. The lights flickered again, and the figure of Dr. Hale appeared on one of the tables. Suddenly, he was upon them, and the room filled with the sound of surgical tools clattering. The last thing Tom felt was the cold, sharp sting of a scalpel slicing into his neck. By the time authorities found the asylum, they discovered only the camera equipment the group had brought with them, covered in blood. The footage? A series of screams, running footsteps, and then silence. No bodies were ever recovered. The asylum remains closed, but locals say they sometimes hear screaming from deep inside on cold, foggy nights. In the French Quarter of New Orleans, a forgotten hotel stands. It was once the pride of the city, but after a series of gruesome deaths, the hotel was sealed and left to rot. Now, decades later, a group of explorers decides to uncover its secrets. But some places are abandoned for a reason. The Beauvais Hotel was once a grand, luxurious destination in the heart of New Orleans' French Quarter. But in 1939, it was shut down after a series of gruesome murders. Guests were found dead in their rooms, their bodies mutilated in ways the police could never explain. Rumors spread that the hotel was haunted by the spirits of those who had died tragically within its walls. The hotel was sealed and left to decay, a ghost in the middle of a bustling city. Kate, Adam, Sarah, and Mike had heard the stories but didn't believe them. They were YouTubers, famous for exploring abandoned buildings. This was their biggest adventure yet. They sneaked in after dark, the air thick with the smell of mildew and something worse, something metallic like blood. The hotel lobby was eerily untouched, as if time had forgotten this place. Dust covered everything, and the grand chandelier hung crookedly from the ceiling. The group set up their cameras, ready to document their latest find. But as they walked deeper into the hotel, the temperature dropped. Their breath became visible, and they heard faint whispers that seemed to come from the very walls. Splitting up, as always, they made their way through the hotel. Kate and Adam took the upper floors while Sarah and Mike explored the basement, which was once a speakeasy during Prohibition. Downstairs, the smell of decay grew stronger. Old bottles of alcohol still lined the bar, but they were covered in a thick layer of grime. As they approached the far end of the room, they found a locked door. It took all of Mike's strength to break it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading even deeper underground. Upstairs, Kate and Adam found the infamous room 614, where the first murders had taken place. The door creaked as they pushed it open, revealing a room frozen in time. The bed was made, and a suitcase sat in the corner, but blood was smeared across the walls, long dried. As Kate approached the bed, the lights in the hallway flickered, and she swore she saw a figure standing just outside the door. But when she called out to Adam, the figure vanished. In the basement, Sarah and Mike descended the stairs, finding what appeared to be a torture room. Chains hung from the walls, and the floor was covered in dried blood. Mike found an old newspaper detailing how guests had been tortured before their deaths, but something was wrong. The names listed were familiar. They matched the names of people they knew, including their own. Mike dropped the paper in horror. Suddenly, the door to the basement slammed shut, and the lights went out. Sarah's scream echoed through the darkness, but when Mike turned to help, she was gone, vanished without a trace. Panicking, he tried to run back up the stairs, but something grabbed him, dragging him back into the darkness. His screams were the last thing heard. Upstairs, Kate and Adam tried to leave the hotel, but the front doors were locked, even though they had left them wide open. They ran through the halls, hearing footsteps chasing them, but when they looked back, no one was there. The walls seemed to close in on them, and the air grew thick with the scent of death. As they reached the lobby, Adam collapsed, clutching his throat as if being strangled by invisible hands. Kate screamed, watching in horror as his body was lifted into the air and thrown against the chandelier. Blood poured from his mouth, and his eyes turned black. By morning, the Beauvais Hotel stood silent once again. The bodies of Kate, Adam, Sarah, and Mike were never found, but locals say their screams can still be heard on quiet, windless nights. Those brave enough to pass by the hotel claim to see shadowy figures in the windows, watching, waiting for their next victims. On the outskirts of Gary, Indiana, lies an abandoned factory. Once a booming steel mill, it was shut down after a series of strange accidents claimed the lives of its workers. Now, decades later, urban explorers are drawn to its rusted gates, unaware that something still lurks inside, waiting to finish what it started. Gary, Indiana, was once a thriving steel town, but the collapse of the industry left the city in ruins. The old factory on the outskirts of town was one of the largest employers before it was mysteriously shut down in 1965. Rumors swirled about the horrific accidents that plagued the factory, with workers being found crushed under machinery or impaled by falling beams. Some said the factory was cursed, that something evil had been awoken deep within its walls. Jake, Carly, Sam, and Leo had heard the stories, but they were skeptical. Urban exploration was their passion, and they were determined to document their adventure inside the factory, hoping for a thrill and a good story for their YouTube channel. As they approached the factory at dusk, its broken windows and rusting metal loomed ominously against the fading light. They climbed over a broken fence, entering through a gaping hole in the wall. The air was thick with the smell of rust and decay, and the sound of dripping water echoed through the vast empty space. Their flashlights illuminated the massive machines that once churned out steel, now covered in layers of dust and cobwebs. Each step they took sent clouds of dust swirling into the air, making it hard to breathe. They split up to cover more ground, with Jake and Carly exploring the main floor, while Sam and Leo headed upstairs to the offices. As Jake and Carly walked through the cavernous space, they noticed strange markings on the walls, symbols that looked like warnings. Carly traced one with her finger, feeling an eerie chill run down her spine. "Maybe we should go back," she suggested, but Jake was too excited, already filming the vast empty space. Suddenly, they heard a loud crash from above. It sounded like something heavy had fallen. Their hearts raced, and they called out for Sam and Leo, but there was no answer. Meanwhile, Sam and Leo explored the dusty offices filled with old papers and furniture. The atmosphere felt oppressive, and as they moved deeper into the building, they felt an unsettling presence surrounding them. They discovered a room with a massive window overlooking the factory floor. Just as they turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind them. Panic set in as they pulled on the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. They pounded on the door, shouting for help. Outside, Jake and Carly heard their friends' desperate cries but couldn't see what was happening. They rushed back to the staircase, but as they ascended, a deep rumbling shook the factory, making the ground beneath them tremble. "Let's get them!" Jake yelled, adrenaline pumping. They reached the top of the stairs, and just as they approached the office door, it swung open violently, sending them stumbling back. Sam and Leo burst out, their faces pale with terror. "There's something in there," Sam gasped. "Something we can't see." They regrouped, and Jake proposed they leave the factory immediately. But as they turned to make their way back down, the factory seemed to transform. The layout changed in an instant, hallways shifting, doors disappearing. It was as if the factory itself was alive, trying to trap them inside. Desperate, they ran down a corridor that felt endless, the sound of machinery suddenly roaring to life around them. Lights flickered, and the shadows seemed to twist and dance, following their every move. Suddenly, they came upon a massive furnace that had long been dormant. To their horror, they saw a figure inside, its body twisted and mangled as if it had been trapped in the furnace for decades. The figure's eyes were wide open, and it let out a silent scream that resonated deep within their souls. In that moment, they realized they were not alone. The factory had claimed the lives of its workers, and now it was hungry for more. As they tried to back away, the floor beneath them gave way, and they fell into a hidden pit below. When the police finally entered the factory the next day after reports of missing persons, they found only Jake's camera on the floor, still recording. The last footage was shaky, showing frantic faces, the flickering lights, and then darkness. No bodies were ever recovered, but locals claim they can hear the screams of the lost souls echoing through the factory, especially on cold winter nights when the wind howls through the broken windows. Blackwood Manor has stood abandoned for over a century, shrouded in tales of horror and madness. The locals avoid it at all costs, believing it to be haunted by the spirits of the Blackwood family, who vanished without a trace. A group of friends decides to uncover the truth, but they will discover that some doors should never be opened. Nestled in the rolling hills of Kentucky, Blackwood Manor was once a magnificent estate belonging to the wealthy Blackwood family. After a mysterious incident in 1910, the family disappeared, and the manor fell into decay. Legends claim the house was cursed, that the spirits of the family still roamed the halls, trapped in a never-ending nightmare. Determined to document their adventure, a group of friends, Emily, Ryan, Josh, and Lily, set out to explore the manor on a chilly autumn evening. As they approached the grand entrance, the sky turned dark, and the wind howled ominously through the trees. The wooden door creaked open as if inviting them inside, and a wave of cold air hit them, making them shiver. Inside, the grandeur of the manor was still evident, despite the layers of dust and decay. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their crystals glinting like cold eyes. Faded portraits of the Blackwood family lined the walls, their gazes following the explorers as they moved through the halls. They split into pairs, with Emily and Ryan taking the ground floor while Josh and Lily ventured upstairs. Emily felt uneasy as they explored the parlor, noting the oppressive atmosphere. She shuddered at the thought of the family's fate, but Ryan laughed it off, calling it just an old house. Meanwhile, upstairs, Josh and Lily stumbled upon a locked door at the end of the hall. After several attempts, they forced it open, revealing a dusty library filled with ancient books and journals. As they sifted through the pages, they found records of the family's descent into madness, detailing strange rituals and voices that haunted them. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from below, and they rushed back to find Emily and Ryan looking terrified. "Something's in the house," Emily exclaimed. "We heard whispers coming from the walls." Feeling the weight of the atmosphere, they decided to leave, but the front door slammed shut, trapping them inside. Panic set in as they ran to the windows, but every attempt to escape was met with a blinding flash of light and a deafening noise that made their ears ring. As they regrouped in the hallway, they noticed the temperature dropping rapidly. A ghostly mist began to swirl around them, forming into the shape of a woman, her face twisted in anguish. "You must leave," she wailed, her voice echoing in their minds. "He is coming for you." Frightened, the group turned to run, but the manor seemed to twist around them. Doors vanished, and the walls closed in, forcing them into a narrow corridor. As they raced down the hall, they found themselves back in the library, but now it was different. The books were alive, pages fluttering and whispering secrets. Then they heard it, a low guttural growl from the shadows, followed by the sound of footsteps. Something monstrous was chasing them, its breath hot and rancid. They bolted for the nearest door, only to find themselves back in the parlor, where the portraits now bled from their eyes, weeping for the family's fate. As the growling grew louder, the group huddled together in terror, and then everything went dark. The next morning, townsfolk found Blackwood Manor silent once more. But in the distance, they could hear faint whispers and laughter. When they entered the house, they found no sign of the four friends, only the old journals, still open, detailing the horrors of a family forever trapped, and a new entry scrawled in a frantic hand: "We are the Blackwoods now.